Following on from my two recent videos that talked about the technique of front rows in the scrum and the middle row, today I want to look at some other finer points of scrummaging. First up, the pack working as an 8. Here's a good recent example, where although it's the Hurricanes' feed, the Blues pack work as an 8. They win the hit, they maintain good low body shape, they're all at the same height, driving in the same direction. And then they keep pumping their legs as they drive through over the ball. Eventually they win a turnover. Now to the importance of the back row staying on the scrum with their shoulders in contact and providing drive for as long as they can before they need to disengage to follow the ball. Let's look at an example of the Wallabies back row here. The All Blacks have got a clearly dominant scrum and the Wallabies are going backwards. But very early on, all three of the Wallabies back row have come up off the scrum. They're no longer assisting with the drive, and effectively the Wallaby pack is then working as a 5 rather than an 8. Here's another scrum with the Wallabies against Italy this time, and it's a much better scrum. Partly because the Wallabies flankers stay on the scrum a lot longer, the shoulders are in contact with the prop's hips, and they're assisting with the drive. Now although Samo's not pushing from number 8, I'll show you why that's not such a problem in a moment. To show you more about how the back 5 works in a scrum, it's worthwhile having a look at overhead footage. First let's look at the angles the props are driving on. Due to the fact that the opposition is offset to your right, the props actually work on different angles. The tight head usually drives quite straight, aiming to drive between the opposition loose head and hooker. On the other side, the loose head aims to get his head under the sternum of the opposition tight head, and therefore he has to drive on an angle from his original starting position. Now, in order to understand how the drive of the middle row is channeled through the prop in the required direction, we first have to remember that both the flanker and the lock only have one shoulder in contact with the prop. So when they're driving forward, it's natural that their drive angles through that shoulder rather than being a straight drive as many people assume. This means that the flanker and the lock are actually pushing in different directions, but when their force meets at the prop, the force goes straight through. So the drive from the flanker is helping to control the drive of the lock. If the flanker's not pushing, the lock's drive will be going in the opposite direction to that required. And this is what makes it critical for the flanker to stay on the scrum and continue driving. Now the other thing you'll probably notice from these clips is that the locks are actually pushing in different directions. So far from them working together as most people assume, the locks actually work closely with the flanker and the prop in a pod of 3, rather than working together. You'll also see that that means the lock's hips come apart and there's nothing for number 8 to push on. So what is the role of the number 8? Well, when it's your feed, the number 8 will normally be controlling the ball at the back of the scrum. When it's the opposition feed, they'll normally be the first one up, looking to leave the scrum early and chase the ball, as Samo was against Italy. One of the other important roles for a number 8 is that they hold the weight back of the scrum until they hear the engage call from the referee when they drive forward, which initiates their own team's engage. I've slowed this footage down so you can get an idea of how the number 8 initiates the engage, even though in this case they went early. Now, as well as pushing to initiate the engagement in the scrum, the number 8 does have a continuing role to push in the scrum up to the point where the lock's hips typically separate. Due to the offset of the opposition scrum, the opposition have their hooker and loose head in a 2-on-1 against your own tight head. So it's the tight head side that needs as much help as possible from the number 8, and so typically they only push with their right shoulder. Of course that can vary depending on which way you're trying to wheel the scrum. But the point is that the number 8 doesn't apply pushing pressure on the scrum for that long before they come up to either control the ball or be the first to leave the scrum and chase the ball.